Assalamualaikum everyone. Hope you all guys are doing great today. We are live with another exciting session of Your Rehnamai. This is mashallah our fifth week of Your Rehnamai series, and the series is brought to you by Rehnamai, which is a one video solution that connects students with scholarships, opportunities, and exchanges, etc. etc. तो ये हमारी जो सीरीज है और इसका जो इस वीक का जो हमारा टाइटल इज entrepreneurship, and this is our fifth day. We'll be talking about who can launch a startup. तो इसके लिए हमारे साथ जो एक्सपर्ट मौजूद हैं, शी हैज़ हर ओन कंपनी इन्वेस्ट टू इनोवेट which basically helps startups which basically helps startups empower them and creates a broader entrepreneurship ecosystem for developing markets in Pakistan. She has uplifted about 16 companies and created over 200 jobs, which is super amazing. Welcome, Kalsoom. क्या हाल है आपका? Hope you're doing great today.
How are you? Thank you. Actually, we've worked with over 47 companies that have created 1,500 jobs. So as an
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, directly. But then we've obviously worked with hundreds of companies now. So thanks for having me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Of course. Achha, so since those, you have worked with 47 directly, indirectly 100 companies, and you have such a vast experience working with startups. Can you tell us, when you're reaching out to a new startup, a young startup, how do how can you tell that the startup is going to have a success, and if the person who's leading the startup has it in himself to to launch a startup well enough to that you're going to do well enough or not?
So just as a quick background, obviously I started Invest to Innovate almost 9 years ago now. So we've worked in the region beyond Pakistan, but I'm also an investor as well. So I can kind of wear both perspectives. So basically one thing that I would say is that I don't typically work with companies or entrepreneurs before they start a business, but I have obviously advised a lot of young people that are looking to start. And what I often say is that the best thing for people, or that I look for in people specifically, is to have something called grit. And so grit Angrezi mein is basically this idea of the confluence of determination and passion, right? And so you can really see that in a founder. So someone who's not just doing it because they want to win an award or there's a competition happening or something like that. This is someone who is so passionate about the problem that they're addressing that they're willing to put as much sweat into it. They're willing to do all the it's not very sexy to run a business, to be honest, right? And oftentimes we look at magazines and we see like Steve Jobs and everything. We often think that that's what I want to do, but in reality, running a business is really hard, right? So what I look for are the people that really have that type of ethic and that work ethic and that passion and that determination.
Interesting. अच्छा, so you have broadly described कि किस तरह से जो होता है ना वो you can tell that if this person will be able to have a success in his startup or not. Let's try to define success as well. I really want you to define what does it mean to have a successful startup, and what does it mean to have a successful business? Is there a definition to that or not?
So I would actually say that what I just stated doesn't mean that you'll necessarily have a successful startup, right? Yeah, Pakistan ki halat is so difficult, right? It's so hard to build a business that there's so many reasons why you may not succeed that may not be because of you specifically, right? Like I think we just have such a difficult environment to build things. There's such a lack of funding that exists. The regulatory environment is really hard. Obviously, issues with taxation and things like that. There's a lot of reasons why your business may not succeed from that thing. What I was talking about specifically are the traits that I think are important. So I think what's amazing is that oftentimes when I meet young people that are starting a business, what I often say to them is that, if this first business does not succeed, and I'll explain what, succeed means, because I think it's a really loose term. If your first business doesn't succeed, if you have that type of determination, the second one could succeed, right? The third one could. And oftentimes investors really will invest in you as a person and obviously look at the business opportunity and things like that. So in Pakistan, I think success means, And I think oftentimes we think that success means that, oh, I've raised funding, right? And I actually don't think that that's actually the case, and that's not the truth. I think success is like, have you actually executed on your business? Are you building revenue? Are you hiring people? Are you building something that's actually growing over time? And I think we create these very toxic ways of thinking that success is how many awards that you've won, how much funding have you received, what is my valuation, right? So Pakistan, I feel like Hamisha, we're always saying that, we want a unicorn. And I think the reality is that a unicorn mindset of like wanting $1 billion valuation we've seen in Silicon Valley has not always been a reality, right? So I think what young people that are starting businesses should really focus on is like, how am I building something that's actually addressing a real problem that exists? And how am I doing it better than my competitors? How am I learning from my customers and listening to them better than my competitors are? And how am I being determined and passionate enough to build something that can actually grow over time? And I think that's what we should look at as success, not evaluation or not how much money or how many awards we've received.
Interesting. So since we have established what it means to be sort of established what it means to be successful in Pakistan, let's talk about the qualities leading to that success for a founder, for a co-founder, right? And also I'd like to to define what a founder and a co-founder is. What's the difference between that? Is there a difference or not? And how and what are the qualities that lead to becoming a successful startup founder?
So I kind of already talked about that, right? In terms of, I really feel like it's beyond passion. It's passion and determination first. And I think as an investor, that's the number one thing that I look at. I also look at humility, right? So, and honestly, these sound like really soft things, but I think as an investor, it's this thing about coachability is really important, right? Because ultimately when you get someone to invest in you and invest in your company, this is someone that's going to be working with you for a long time, right? It's like, Shadi ke baad, like who's going to be staying there with you? That's ultimately that investor, right? So you want to make sure that you have traits that are aligned, but also that founder is going to listen and you guys are going to listen to each other, right? That relationship is really important. And so humility is really important because oftentimes I meet founders that think that they know everything already, right? And that to me is a sign of arrogance because ultimately we don't know anything. Right? Like, so if you don't know everything, it's really about the ability to want to learn, to want to listen. And listening is the most important trait that I think an entrepreneur can really have because your ability to listen to your customers and to iterate your business makes you better than your competitors, ultimately. Because in Pakistan, people think that they've created something. I've heard so many people think that they don't have any competitors. And that's actually, unless you've created something that no one's ever heard before, there is probably someone that's done it out there, right? So the only way you can be better is by executing. And so what I look for in founders are people that are focused on execution and are really putting their heads down. So if I look at someone who's in like 5 incubators, while that's great, it's also maybe a sign that they're spending too much time at these programs and not enough time focused on actually executing on their business and listening to their customers, which I think makes you an investable business. So that's really important to pay attention to.
Interesting. Since you have very nicely described कि ये qualities होनी चाहिए कि एक startup के founder के अंदर. So let's talk about how to build those qualities. I really want to build into कि जो आपने soft skills. You have majorly mentioned all the soft skills that are needed to एक चाहिए होते हैं founder को चाहिए होते हैं. तो वो soft skills कैसे आप build कर सकते हैं? If you're really looking into going, if you really, for example, there's a problem that you see that there's in this your county or आपके शहर के अंदर ये मसला है, ठीक है? And you really want to work on it, but you may lack some of those very important soft skills that are needed for you to make it a success. तो वो आप कैसे ले सकते हो? After recognizing that there is a problem.
Yeah, bilkul. I think oftentimes too, the way that our education system is in Pakistan is that we don't value people that question the system, right? Everything is like rote memorization and you just kind of do things, right? So there are things that you can learn and you can do. You don't have to be born with these soft skills, right? So oftentimes I meet young founders who come into our program, right? And a lot of times it's polishing how they already are. So I think there are things that you're born with, which is, do you have that passion about the problem that you're trying to address? But I think you can, if you want to build the ability to take feedback on, is just talk to as many people as possible. right, about your business, and think
Right.
about like how to listen to that. Because everyone's going to have their own opinion about what you do, what you're doing wrong, this person's doing this right, or whatever. It's also your ability to sift through feedback, right? And so it's just going and talking to people. I think another really good skill set to build is research, right? And going and speaking to your customers, getting feedback, right? So there's something called that we do in our accelerator program. It's called the Lean Startup Methodology, right? And the Lean Startup Methodology is this idea that you shouldn't spend years or months building something that nobody wants, right? The very first thing you should do is go out and test and see, does your customer base actually want that? Who is your customer base? How do you listen to them? What's the feedback that you're doing? And so even if you don't have the natural ability to do that, like you can learn how to do that by just constantly practicing it, right? And so I think these are all things, we've had some founders that I think are really natural at it. And then there's some people that, learn it because they really want to learn it. So I think it's also the ability to want to learn is oftentimes some of the best founders that I've worked with, right? Or the ones who are maybe not from the best universities, but are so humble and smart and willing to work. And those are things that you can't teach in some ways, right? If you have that kind of fire in you, I can't teach that to you. But if you have it, I recognize it in people, and I don't choose people based on if their English is better than their Urdu or where they went to school or whatever. Like for me, if you got it, you got it. And we're going to work with you to help you kind of make you maybe sound more polished in how you deliver it, basically.
Very, very interesting. Acha, so now that we have, you can actually, it's not something, if you're not born with something, you can obviously go out and learn it. So let's talk about these times. For example, I am a person who wants to do a startup. I see a problem in my community and really want to deal with it. I have some sort of like a idea of how I can deal with it. But I in the past I really don't have a business degree, or I don't really know the marketing strategies or the business strategies. In these COVID times, when incubators are right now closed and you can't really go to an incubator center, how do you learn while being in quarantine? How, and from your home? Are there any ways to learn anything about it?
So first of all, incubation centers aren't closed, right? Like all of us are doing virtual programming right now. So, we have a partnership with Facebook. We're doing digital boot camps. We have applications open for that. We have applications open for women entrepreneurs that want to apply. And I'll please feel free to share the links to all of that. I know that the NICs are still doing selection right now. So even though it's COVID, everyone's gone virtual. And I think we've realized actually, at least with some of our programming, our team that's been implementing it is that we realized sorry, there's a bit of a feedback, but I think that there is also the value of it. Being virtual because they can learn from. I can hear you. There's just feedback.
All right.
So I'm just saying that there's a lot of mentors. There's a lot of content online that you can find and you can learn. Right now.
All right. Interesting. Good to know. अच्छा, तो यहाँ पर एक सॉफ्ट स्किल है जिसके लिए हमारे पास क्वेश्चन आया. It's about having the ability to network. So the question is how to network within the startup community, because you need connections, and the class divisions and education background don't really help, and make it more difficult for some people. So how do you build connections in the startup community?
Yeah, I think that it's sometimes hard if you're not part of one of these programs. So while I would advise some of these automatically give visibility and give I would also just reach out to people that you wanted. Can you hear the feedback, or is it just me? By the way?
Are you talking about some like pankhi?
Yeah, my voice is echoing.
Yeah, for some reason it is. Let me just see what's up. Let me just check on this. Okay. It's in my Bluetooth.
While I'm speaking.
Yeah. Your voice is actually. I think its voice is echoing, but I don't know why is that. Like, give me just you know what? Why don't you keep answering the question? And
but I was just gonna say maybe. I'm just gonna keep talking. Oh, the voice is echoing sound. So I was going to say to the person that asked the question that, I think what's really good and really important is that when I first started Eye to Eye, so I know what the problem is. It's you.
I know what the problem is. It's
So
you
if
and
you
my
mute, then the echo won't happen
echo won't happen
Is it
while
my
I'm
mic?
speaking.
while I'm
I'm mute
speaking.
myself.
Yeah.
Okay, just okay.
There we go. Okay. So what I was just going to say is that when I started Eye to Eye, I mean, none of these programs really existed in Pakistan, right? So I built this program because I wish something like this existed when I started my company. So what I often did was that I just reached out to people that I really looked up to and just told them what I was doing and was really specific about what I was looking for, right? So sometimes I get emails from people that are asking for mentorship, but they're really vague about it. And honestly, you have to just be aware of the fact that not a lot of people have time. And so for me specifically, if you were to reach out to me and you were specifically saying like, Kalsoom, this is my company, this is what I'm doing, this is the very specific problem that I need feedback on, you're really likely actually to get a mentor replying back to you. At least that's what happened with me when I started the company. But I think, but I agree that sometimes the divisions are hard. I think that the reality right now is that in the COVID situation is that everything is online, right? So there's all these events and things like that where you're meeting all these mentors in a much more democratic forum. So I've even found in conferences that I've been part of, people that I would have, been too intimidated to go up to at a conference, and I'll just message them on the Zoom chat and get a message back from them. So definitely do that. But yeah, that was the answer to that.
Interesting. I think now my voice is your voice must not be echoing because I changed my headphones. I apologize. Anyways, so you talked about the networking skill that a person must have when they're starting a startup. So let's move on from networking and talk about some other soft skills that are necessary for having that skill to start a startup.
I mean, I've basically named the ones that I think are the most important. So I think humility, I feel like, determination, passion. So yeah, I think those are the main ones that I think, and the ability to kind of take constructive criticism. Yeah, those would be the main soft skills. I think empathy is also really important when it comes to listening.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about the soft skills, and let's talk about some hard skills. Are there any technical skills that you must have or you must build while you're, starting a startup? Let's talk about tech businesses specifically. Tech businesses, like tech startups.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just depends, right? So I think what's the most important thing is that if you're starting a tech company and you don't have a technical background, try to find a technical co-founder. Try to find someone who can be your CTO or someone that has that technical skill. Similarly, if you are more of a tech person, but you need a business person, try to find a business person to kind of match you, right? And so it just depends what you're building, right? So oftentimes, I've like a really strong company that graduated from our batch from the accelerator in February at Casa, which is an ed tech company. They now have a CTO. They found a CTO for the company because they knew that they needed to really properly build a tech platform. They have someone who is really, really good on like the education side, which I think is important because you want someone that actually understands the problem. And then they had someone who is, has a very strong business side. And so I think it's really good to think about the rounding out of it. But yeah, I mean, you learn these things, honestly. Like, I don't have a business background. Like, my background is I was in politics and international relations before, 10 years ago, before I obviously launched Eye to Eye. But so much of this is learning while you do it. And so I think it's really important to think about, like, how quick are you to learn? I think learning really fast and wanting to learn. So I think I'm a deeply curious person. I think that's an important trait for a founder to have. And so I was constantly reading books. I was learning from other people. I was learning from my mentors, and those are the things that I've picked up over the last 10 years.
Interesting. अच्छा तो ये हमने बात की. अच्छा, there's a skill about team building skill. कितना ज़रूरी होता है आपके पास, having that, team leadership skill, leading a team skill, and how do you develop that? पहले आपका idea, because हमेशा भी जब भी कोई idea आता है तो वो आपका most of the time it's an individual idea. You see an individual, you individually see a problem, but obviously when you build a startup, you always need a team. So how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think that's first and foremost the number one thing, right? Is that if you are not good at actually working with other people, you probably shouldn't be building a company, right? Because at the end of the day, like so much of my job actually as someone who's built a company and now built a fund is managing human beings, right? Is we've built a team and we've had many people come through our doors at Eye to Eye over the last 10 years. But even with the startups that we've had, it's your ability to give up power, right? And I think oftentimes like we think when something is just ours, we don't want anybody else to have any sort of access to it, or we don't want anything that can, I guess, damage our ego on it. And so much about really good leadership and really good leadership skills is delegating power or empowering others to be able to come up with you. It's the ability to say, I don't know everything, and this is who I'm hiring so that we can actually build out a better team, right? And those are things that I think, I don't know, you can definitely learn it. It's something that happens with experience. I've definitely seen poor leadership in the startup space in Pakistan, and I've seen it in the startup space everywhere, actually. We've definitely had very global challenges. And when we look at Uber as an example, Travis Kalanick had to step down from Uber because of just poor leadership, right? And ultimately, it comes down to your ability to say that, how much humility do you have? And we think about these as soft skills, but ultimately, these are leadership skills as well.
Yeah. Interesting. So, when you have an idea and you are, you have somehow gained these skills as well. How do you, when before launching a startup, how do you decide your idea is valid or your idea is, is going to be, is something that, you should work on?
I mean, what I would say is like, my very first question is like, how urgent is the problem that you're addressing, right? Is this something that is a big problem that everyone feels like is an important problem? Because if it's only something that you think is important, then and you do research and nobody else thinks it's a problem because it's not a problem for most people, it's probably not going to be something that's very addressable, right? So there's something in building a business called your addressable market. And what I always tell startups is like, it's not just a problem that you face. It should be a problem that you face because it should be personal to you. But is this a problem that is urgent for everybody else, right? Because that also speaks to the opportunity and how big your market is. Because that's fine if you want to build like a small company that's doing something that's very niche. That's great. It probably won't be a venture capital investment from our side, right? And that's okay too. It doesn't have to be. But from a venture capital perspective, as an investor, I look at the founders first, and then I secondly look at the market opportunity and how big is the addressable size of what they're trying to do. And that's really important for founders. Is when you're looking at something, look at something that's like a big problem to address, right? Like Pakistan, there's obviously so many issues around us. Like when we think about healthcare, when we think about education, we think about, what technology can generally provide, right, to the issues of surrounding us. When we think about what fintech could be. So think about that and look at like other markets, because I think oftentimes we think about like when we look at like what's going on in, India or Southeast Asia, those are really similar markets to Pakistan. What are solutions that have been built out there that could be replicated in Pakistan? So I would look at it from that angle as well.
All right. So, doing your research and, finding out what other communities have done, you may get inspiration to that if your idea is going to work or not work. All right. Good. Very good. Thank you. Acha, so when you have an idea, okay, you're young, you're a student, you have an idea, you have, done all of the measures that we've talked about. How important it is to get a mentorship? How important it is to, have someone as a mentor, and then being someone who lives in Lahore, for example, or lives in like a smaller town, for example, Okara. How do they get to that mentorship, and how do they reach out?
Yeah, so I was talking about this earlier. I think right now with COVID, we've actually seen everything's gone online, right? So the ability to reach out to people, most people are at home right now. This is the right time to reach out to people because nobody's out and about. Everyone's stuck at home in the pandemic. So even if you're sitting in Okara or, you're sitting in Sialkot and you want to reach out to someone who's in Lahore, someone who's in Karachi, someone who's in the US, do it. right? Because in terms of the way technology is, a lot of those barriers are going down. I definitely think it's important to not just have one mentor, have multiple mentors, right? And just say to yourself, like when I was building Eye to Eye, I was like, okay, there's someone in Brazil who's built this really well and I want to learn from her. And so I just emailed her and just said, hi, like, I love what you've built. Like, can we get on a phone call? Right. And she did. And this was, this was 10 years ago. And then she was on my board for a little while and ended up building a great relationship. But I've done that so many times with people that I just reach out to. And I think don't just think of the mentor as someone who's older than you, right? I think it's also really important to think about like who are other people around you that are building businesses that might be the same age as you, right? Some of the best mentors I had were people who were my age that were building other companies. They were the best motivation for me. So build a community around yourself as well. And it doesn't have to be in person, right? And if you're sitting in Okara, it's okay. And actually, we've had some great entrepreneurs come from Okara. If we look at Sidra Qasim and Waqas Ali from, they built Marcora and then they built Adams. I mean, they're from Okara, right? So don't feel limited by where you are geographically in Pakistan, right? And just realize that there's an opportunity for you to reach out, especially right now with everyone being at home.
Very interesting, very interesting. Thank you so much for answering that. Acha, let's move on towards, as we have, as we're working through the conversation, you have your idea, you have your mentor, you have, done your homework and everything. Now, how do you pitch? Every startup needs a financial, base and standing. And how do you pitch an idea? And who do you pitch an idea to? Then again, like, are there types of investors? And how do you decide who's going to pitch to? And if you have found someone you want to pitch to, how do you build your pitch?
Yeah, that's a big question. So, I mean, obviously, a really good pitch should be telling the story of your company, right? So, what I always tell people is, and we work with our startups on this, on building out their pitch, right, for investors. So number one, who are you pitching to and why? Because it could just be that you're pitching for partnerships, you're pitching to corporates, you're pitching to get team members on board, or are you pitching for funding, right? And if you're pitching for funding, you might just ask yourself, like, what is it that you're looking for, right? And not a venture capital funder is a very different kind of funder than someone who's more of a grant funder, obviously, or someone who's more of an angel investor, right? So we actually do this training at Eye to Eye for startups. I actually just ran it this week, which is like, what are the different stages of where you're at? So if you're just starting out, you're not a good fit for an institutional fund, right? You might be a better fit for an angel funder. You might have a grant funding. But the components of a pitch tends to be the same, which is number one, problem. Then you look at the market opportunity. Then you look at the solution. What is your value proposition? Who is the team to do it? What is your ask? What's the call to action, right? And what I always tell, we do like our workshop with our founders. We actually do it up in Bhorba, and we did it in Muzaffarabad this year. We go out to the mountains and basically just do a weekend retreat. And what we do is we actually focus on storytelling first, because that's ultimately what a good pitch is. It's a great story you're telling about your company. And then we build out the pitch, right? And ultimately what I always say is that you want to make your audience, if they're your investors, you want to get them excited. So what's the story that you're telling that's going to get someone excited? And that would be my advice.
Interesting. Thank you so much for answering. And I believe I think you have put it very nicely. एक story आप पहले story build up पे बात करें, and then maybe you can build from that a great pitch, and figuring out who you want to invest to and what stage you are at your startup. That could be a way to start to getting a successful one. अच्छा, तो अब हमने इस बारे में बात की. अच्छा, for example, you have an idea and you have a startup, and for some reason you haven't reached out to any investment, and my question is कि आपके पास एक minimum amount है, and that's that you don't have a lot of finances. How do you start your startup from a very minimum investment? Think of it like 10,000 rupees or some sort of can you start a startup from a minimum amount or not?
Yeah, you can start a startup with anything. You can start a startup with nothing, right? If you want to. What I always tell people is bootstrap your company as long as possible before you go out and raise money. And so if you're privileged and lucky enough to have savings and money to start, I think the best thing about tech right now is that you literally just need an internet connection and you need your laptop. to build something. So don't think that you need to raise a lot of money right off the bat, because oftentimes if you're, raising too much money before you've even started your idea, you're not in a good position of power or negotiation with investors, right? Because you haven't proven anything. So what I think is really important as a founder is go out and prove that there's actually a market for what you're building, that there's traction around it, and then think about building funding. And if you can do that by bootstrapping with whatever you have, right? Like, if you can do it for free, if you can do it with 10,000 rupees, 100,000 rupees, right? Whatever. If there's family and friends that want to give you money to start something because they believe in your idea too, which is why it's important to think about what is the story you're telling, right? So you can do it for however much you want. And then what I would say is that when you are actually fundraising, think about like, first of all, build traction for your business, build something that shows that there is a minimum viable product. That's your MVP, right? When you go out and raise, ask yourself, what are you raising for, right? What's the purpose of that fundraising going to be? And if it's in service to, as an example, when you're really early, if it's in service to really getting your prototype, right? Or if it's in service to you having early traction, it might be in service to, this could be your major fundraising round. It could be in service to you growing your company. So there's different types of funding allocated for different stages of where you are at with your business. So I would really recommend being thoughtful about that.
Interesting. अच्छा, तो हमने अभी almost we have figured out and work with all of the qualities that you must have for a successful startup. Let's talk about the failed ones. Let's talk about the dark side of it. Let's talk about कि कौन सी चीजें हैं that you have seen startups that you have worked with did wrong while just launching the startup in the mid startup कि उन्होंने जो है ना वो गलतियां की and जिसकी वजह से they were not able to pursue it further.
I think galtiya and like failure is really interesting words, right? Because I think that we think about failure as an end to a company. And I think oftentimes in Pakistan, we think that, we're so afraid of failure that we won't, or so afraid of making mistakes that we won't even start something, right? And I think what we should actually frame this all as is that mistakes and failure is actually part of the learning process. So I think maybe the most common things that I see are, number one, people spent way too much money off the bat on something that didn't matter, right? So really thinking about, again, the lean startup methodology, how can you be as lean as possible? So the lean startup methodology, the idea is, what is the minimum amount of money that you need for the maximum amount of learning? Right? So what is the least amount that you need to put into your company time-wise, money-wise, in order to get the most amount of learning out of it, right? But I've seen people make mistakes because they spent too much money up front. They spent too much money on the wrong things. They hired wrong. There's so many mistakes that you are going to make, right? So it's not just that the reality is that we're never going to make a mistake or we're never going to have a failure. The reality is that you will fail. You will make mistakes. It's more how you recover from it, how you learn from it, right? And the ideal is that you make so many small mistakes that you're constantly learning from, that you don't die, your company doesn't die because of one big failure, right? So that's why I think that kind of iterative learning is really important for founders to think about.
All right. अच्छा, तो as मतलब हमने अभी बात की कि छोटे छोटे failures आपको you will face them and they will happen and then you'll have to get a move on with it. अच्छा, तो how do you keep your motivation up and running as you see the failures? Like you're after all we're all human beings and we get disappointed, and how do we at the end of the day make ourselves feel okay about it and just move on and work the next day in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, I probably experience that. Everyone experiences it on a weekly, daily basis, right? Of like feeling just unmotivated or stressed out or feeling like you messed up. And that's the regular roller coaster of what it means to build a business. So what I always tell people is that that's why you have to be so passionate about this, right? Like this should be like, for me, I've been building this company for over almost 10 years now. I'm an investor. I eat, breathe, and sleep startups. Like this is literally my life. Like and it's to the point where I've spent most of this is the longest I haven't been on a plane because of COVID, right? But I'm typically on a flight every couple of weeks, or every other week. I'm constantly not sleeping, but it's because I love what I do, right? And I'm so passionate. I believe in what we're building. And so I always tell our founders this, that really build something around why you're doing what you're doing and not what you're doing, right? So ask yourself, why is it that I'm building this? And so that when you're feeling unmotivated, feel unmotivated, okay? It's natural, but then the next day, just say that I'm building something that's bigger than me, and this is bigger than myself and what I'm feeling right now. So I'm going to get back up and do it. And then also, if you're feeling bad or feeling unmotivated, it's okay. Like, it's okay to feel that way, and we all feel that way, right? Like, Pakistan, I feel like we oftentimes celebrate people for just the glossy things, but we don't talk about failure openly. And the reality is that we constantly have fears and doubts and failures. And I think if you create space, you'll find that out, and so you don't feel so alone in that as well, which I think is why you should have a community around you.
All right. So a community that supports you, and just thinking that it's all right, and be passionate about your startup. You can deal with your failures, that small failures that you may face while you're a startup. And I guess just realizing that you can launch a startup, and having the idea that it's all right and it's okay, you can move on. I guess we're almost at the end of our show today. Kalsoom, I would really like you to, just conclude what we have talked about today, and, just tell us that who can launch a startup in a few lines, if you may.
Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the platform and the ability to speak to you guys. I don't get to do the fun stuff anymore as much as I want to, because I'm so busy with our fund and things that we're building. But what I would say to young founders that are looking to start is that, if you want to start, just start. Don't wait for someone to give you the green, the flag or the signal to start something. If you feel excited about it, if you have the ability and the privilege to start something, or start something small while you're working, start something while you're in college, build something from the ground up and get feedback on it. And, inshallah, hopefully that turns into something. But if it doesn't, that's okay too. And maybe your second thing or your third thing is what becomes a success. So good luck.
Interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today, and giving us, sharing us with your, this 10-day, more than 10 years of long experience of working with startup and empowering them. So thank you so much for joining. Now I would like to thank my audience. Thank you. Now I would like to thank my audience who were there with us, and you who joined us, and I saw people who were, people were coming in. So thank you guys for joining. Inshallah, we'll be live tomorrow as well, and we will be talking about this new topic that is about startup world, a glamour or a reality. Like, what's the difference between the glamour, realities of it, and what are the dark sides. We touched upon it today with Kalsoom as well, but we'll go deeper into it tomorrow, inshallah, with Fasim Mehta. तब तक के लिए हमें इजाज़त दीजिए. Thank you so much for joining. अल्लाह हाफ़िज़. अपने घर वालों का ख्याल रखिएगा और सेफ रखिएगा. खुदा हाफ़िज़.